Thank you, everybody, for joining us on another Witty Saturday. We're very excited to have two, I wouldn't say Silicon Valley legends, but technology industry and all over the world. So, Bill Ryan and Andy Abramson. I'm going to turn it over to you. Please take us down the Boulevard of Communication.
All that stuff I just said wasn't recorded. Anyway, I'm not going to do it.
Part, you'll remember it again.
Yeah, I'll talk about the Carter part. So, Bill, take it away.
So, we were talking about this on the Speed2Cool website, and I encourage everybody to go there. It's speed2cool.com. Okay, and the idea of Speed2Cool is just a meme, and it's a meme that is all about how fast does it take you when you're telling your story to get people from going, oh, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Oh, tell me more. But then we've all had that experience. We've been in that room telling our story when all of a sudden somebody gets it. Grok. Okay. So, anyways, we've all been there. People have been in the room. They've been polite. That's interesting. But then all of a sudden something happens in the room and somebody gets it. They kind of use the old term grok. If you know what grok means, it tells you how old you are because you read Stranger in a Strange Land. But all of a sudden they go, oh, wow, that's cool. Their body language changes everything because interesting is all in your head, right? Cool is an emotional experience. People don't buy things because they're interesting. Things buy things that they have an emotional connection to. Okay. And that's what your story is all about. How do you tell a story in a way that it has what we kind of call the 5 C's? Is it compelling? Is it credible? Is it concise so other people can tell it for you? And is it is it contagious? Does it continue to get out there and begin to have legs? So a lot of what our work is, all initial work with the architecture of identity process, is looking at the 3 factors of how you see yourselves from the inside out, and what are the 5 ways that the world sees you from the outside in. Knowing those 2 things help shape the overall story. And then in the context, the background and the support for that story are the 2 things that Andy had just brought up. One is the details of your backstory. Okay, Bill did this from this time and this time. He's now working on this. So all of that is kind of data and backstory, which helps for credibility. But then it's, what do people remember about you? What is your legend? And, we were in a meeting, one of the breakout meetings, and someone was kind of saying, well, why do I care about what anybody else says? Okay, well, if you don't care what anybody else says, then don't worry. Then don't be worried that nobody's buying your product or nobody's getting, wants to take you on a date. So, so legend then is an important thing to know. And I would encourage everybody. We talked about legend in another meeting that we did on Tuesday at 10 o'clock in Metal. But your legend is what people remember about you and talk about you. And it's a good exercise to go around to your clients or your friends and say, what do you think my story is? What do you think I'm all about? What is the value that I bring to you? And you'll be amazed at the feedback you get, because that'll help you understand how relevant you are at that moment into situations. And so I asked this to a client years ago. I said, what do you think we actually do? We were doing their PR for them and that. But I said, what do you think we actually do for you? And he goes, or I do for you. I was about me. And he goes, Bill, you're in the clarity business. You are in the corporate clarity business. You take all this complexity and you net it out into easily understand stories. Well, once you've got the story, then now what? And that kind of takes us into the next process, which Andy's going to talk about, which is the Boulevard of Communications, which is once you have your story and you understand your legend in the world, and you've got backstory to data to support whatever your claims are. Now, how are you bringing that story to market? And so with that, Andy, I'm going to let you kind of take it from here. Andy, we can't hear you. Andy, you're on mute. There you go.
I know, but it's however the settings were set that I unmuted and somehow I got muted again. David, I just asked that one of my AIs get admitted. There we go. Thank you. All right. So Boulevard of Communication. How many? I have a question. Show of hands of all the people in the peanut gallery. How many of you actually have a front-facing role to just raise your hand because I don't want you to speak. Front-facing role to tell your story to an audience. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those of you who are using avatars, we can't see you raise your hand, so that doesn't help. You can raise your hand using the little button down the bottom that says raise hand. So half of you. So when it comes to telling a story and you're in a company, you may have one person who speaks on behalf of the company all the time, or there may be multiple people who have to tell the story. And if you don't have a story that everyone needs to tell, what you end up with is narrative drift. Person A says one thing, person B says another, person C says another, and pretty soon your customers are confused as to what you do, what you sell, who you're for, because we all tell a story. I see Martin shaking his head yes, meaning he's probably lived through this. We all tell a story from our own perspective. I want you to think about it. You join a company with another person at the same time. And as you're moving through the company, you're constantly comparing your strengths to their weaknesses and their strengths to your own. And pretty soon you start shaping what you're saying to outdo the other person, and vice versa. You're protecting yourself against their strengths in a meeting because you want the next promotion. You know that you only have 90 days to make a good showing, or you're not going to ever get that promotion. Corporate America, corporate world. Or you're selling a product against somebody else's and you react to what the other company does, even though if you stayed on point for your story, it was already built, you're going to outdistance them because you're consistent. When we talk about a story, we talk about the five C's: clear, credible, compelling, consistent, and contagious. Now, up until recently, we never emphasized consistency. We took it for granted. But as we started to go deeper and deeper talking to executives of companies, when we would talk to them one-on-one versus as a group, we found that consistency was out the door. Person A was telling story one way, person B was telling story another. You actually would have thought you were talking to two different companies. Therefore, the Boulevard of Communication takes the architecture of identity and we coalesce the story into a single unified story. That's the what. The next thing we do is we look at it and we say, who are we speaking to? Who is the audience we want to go after? Who needs to hear what we're doing with both ears? Because we all know, especially if you're talking to salespeople, they talk with two mouths and listen with one ear. We want to make sure that the story resonates. So who is the audience? Well, we focus the story really around three buckets. And of course, the media and the analysts factor into the customer bucket. That's the first bucket, your customer or your customers. You want to make sure your customers know exactly what you do, who you do it for, how you do it, why you do it, what problems you solve. Oh yeah, you got to solve a problem. The second audience would be your ecosystem. affectionately used in this industry, your partners. I hate the word partner because a partner legally has an obligation to carry half the risk. So all these people say, yeah, they're my partner. They're not carrying half the risk. So don't confuse them. But the ecosystem, who are the distributors, your sales channel, who are the companies that technology works with you, who are people who are selling you. You pick your so-called ecosystem and make sure your story resonates because as Bill likes to say, are you the company everybody wants to make a deal with? Are you the company who everybody can count on to be there when they need you? Think about the world's best ecosystems: Cisco, Microsoft, Apple, Salesforce, Oracle. These companies have thriving ecosystems. If you don't want to work with one part of it, you work with another one in there. They have built-in redundancy. You don't like company A, go to company B. That's what they do. They build an ecosystem so you have the opportunity to sell more, work with more, deliver more, validate more, whatever it is. That's why their ecosystem events are so important for you to be a part of, but you have to be an ongoing player in the ecosystem. You don't just sign up, fill in the form, and then go, Steph Curry, night, night. You can't do that. You got to be active. And then the third audience that the Boulevard of Communication really attacks are your investors or your future acquirers. Now, you'll say, isn't that the job of like the investor relations guy, or isn't that the job of the corporate development person? No, it's part of your story. With the 60 exits we've now been through, and Jazz, we're not counting your first one, by the way. With the 60 exits we've been through, the core story has always gotten told by using this Boulevard of Communication approach, making sure the customers know exactly what you do, making sure the ecosystem players are well aware of what you do, because then they direct their customers and their partners to you. And the last one is making sure the investors or acquirers really can make sense of what you do and what slot you fill. So,
And this is a part of the story that is often told uniquely to them, not to your customers, but where are you headed? What is your strategy? Part of your story needs to be not just what are we selling today, but what do we plan to sell in the future? Because today, yes, they want to know that you've got a valuable product and that you can do something and that people will buy this or sign up for it. That's all good. But everybody knows that anything can be replaced over time. So you need to continue to evolve. They want to know where you're headed. And we have just have a model we call the road to nirvana, and which you could all play with, which is just here's the timeline and here's functionality, and here is the end game. Your end goal, nirvana in your space. What's that perfect thing? That's your vision. That's the embodiment of your overall vision. And so when you're talking about investors, they want to know where you're headed. And so you've got to actually sell and get credibility, not only for what you're doing today, but your strategy for moving forward.
the biggest thing when you're talking to investors or acquirers is being able to identify what niche you're filling for them in the sense of in their portfolio. But if it's an acquirer, is your solution, is your business able to fill a gap that they have or which they plan to have in the future? When Google acquired Global IP Solutions in 2009, 2010, it was because they saw the future of real-time communication and they wanted the underpinnings of a robust WebRTC-based solution. They pieced that together with what they had from Gizmo Project that was acquired, Grand Central, which was acquired, and they put all this together and they developed what's known as Google Meet and what's known as Google Chat and even improved Google Voice, which was Grand Central, which was another one of our exits. So when we look at how we were able to craft the narrative and then build the Boulevard of Communication, the goal was to get acquired by a company like Google. That was one of 3 companies on the short list when we met with the CEO and the CMO. What was your outcome? To be acquired. Same thing goes all the way back to StubHub. When the founders, Jeff and Colin, and I sat down and talked with them, they said, well, it's either going to be Ticketmaster or eBay. And we decided that they decided eBay was the better target, and eBay ended up acquiring them. So being able to shape your narrative to identify to investors or acquirers what gap you fill is a key element to it. But before that, it's telling your story to your customers. Because at the end of the day, especially today, where everybody looks at monthly recurring revenue, run rate, where they look at what's your pipeline look like. If you don't have a good story that hooks people to stimulate a trial, to keep somebody using you, to have them refer you, net promoter score, your story plays the fundamental part of all of that. Now, let's think about the different ways your story gets amplified. The first way is you go to an event and you speak. One of our standard lines you will hear me say and Bill say is it's always better to be the face the crowd is looking at than to be a face in the crowd. I will repeat, it's always better to be the face the crowd is looking at than to be a face in the crowd. I would say to you, if you're a CEO, unless you're going to an event where let's say you're a CEO of a $10 million company, unless the people speaking are CEOs of $30 million companies or VPs of $100 million companies or group product directors of $500 million companies, don't you dare sit in the audience. And if you're a CEO of a company that's doing 30 or 40 million dollars a year, don't you dare sit on the stage of a startup with a product manager of a company that's doing less than $1 million a year. As Michael Robertson, who founded MP3.com and Gizmo Project, once said when they went public, Andy, I'm a CEO of a public company. As much as you're my friend and I want to help you out, I can't be on stage with a guy with a startup with no revenue. It diminishes your value. You're judged by the company you keep. So think about who you're on stage with and why before you commit, but you want to be on stage. So have a good story that gets you on stage with the right people at the right time. The second thing is make sure you're talking to you're telling your story in such a way so it can be told and retold by the people in the audience, the media. Have a great story for the media. Educate the industry analysts. That's real important. Educate the industry analysts because they're going to tell your story exactly the way you said it. And then lastly, make sure you're talking in sound bites so the people in the audience, when they walk away, can say, I saw Martin, or I saw Dan, or I saw Raymond, and he said this about his company. I need to make sure our X back at the company talks to them. I'm going to go up and talk to them now, get a business card, and make an introduction. That's what, when you're talking at an event, you want to make sure that that story is so well received that you can get other leads out of it. So that's initial audiences, speaking at events, talking to the media, and then talking to the analysts, and of course, talking to the audience. Bill?
So what I wanted to talk about being on stage and getting that. Anytime, I'm sure anybody that's been a speaker at a conference, the going rule is there's no selling soap from the podium. Okay, no selling soap from the podium. So what you need to do is, so they don't want you getting up there and giving your pitch, your product pitch. However, underneath all of that, there are certain assumptions that people use to make a buying decision. Okay, it's not why you think you're the best. It's why in a buying situation, other people, these are what people use to evaluate what is good, what is bad. Those are based on perceptions. So think through more. When you're on a stage, you're really evangelizing a big idea, a bigger idea. So get up there and talk about an idea that if people believe it, that will help them look at what you're doing through your lens, not through somebody else's lens. Let's say you're selling, you're out selling some kind of car service or whatever. One supplier might say, hey, ask these 3 questions before you make a choice. Now, what you want to do is say, ask yourself these 3 questions. You want the questions that people should be asking to facilitate your choices, what you think is important, why another is. One of my old mentors used to say, branding is defining the standard in a way that the way that it eliminates the competition. So when you're up there, you're talking about the meta, the big ideas that are at the basis of what your company is about and its values. So start talking about giving that, and that's a form of you could use speaking as a form of evangelism marketing. Now, at the end of the day, there's one Uber story. We often say many stories, or one story, several accents. Obviously, the way you're going to talk to a customer is different than the way you're going to talk about an analyst. Analysts have they want to know different things. They want to know a lot more about your numbers. They want to know strategic. Your investors want to know where you're headed. But at the end of the day, the overall story, how you're expressing what you do, why you're different, why people should care, all of that stuff remains the same. There's just different nuances. So so as you're giving presentations and you're talking about your product, your services, ask yourself first, what does that person already think is important? Because if you're not looking through their lens about what's important, then you're going to miss the mark, because all you're doing is talking about why you think everything is so great. Well, they may not care about that. You've got to move them into a place where they already think that these are the criteria for making an important decision. Does that make sense, Andy?
It does. I think it's important that when people are delivering a speech, that one of the things that we often overlook is things like tone and use of visuals, interaction, and personalization. So we always like to say when we're working with somebody on how to give a speech, just like when we're working with someone on media training on how to talk to the media or how to deliver a story to the analyst, is use a conversational tone. Make it feel like a dialogue, not a lecture. No one wants to be lectured to. Feel like you're having a conversation with somebody. The other big thing is there's too much of a belief that I'm going to have great visuals. I'm going to have one slide after the other after the other. Well, as someone who's given a lot of speeches, I don't like to use many slides. Have one slide for each main idea and leave it up there. Because as I say to people who are part of the panels that I'll moderate, the audience didn't come to read, they came to hear. So please always make sure that you're not overindulging them with slides and videos and images, because as these slides are moving as you're talking, their eyes and their brain are up there on the screen. They're not here looking at you. So,
and you can always offer to give those 3 slides, 3, not more than 5, absolutely not more than 5, but maybe 3. You can always make the offer, hey, come to our website. There's a link there. I'm happy to, here's the presentation.
right.
Here you can download, and here's those 3 slides.
And by the way, in that slide presentation you're going to download are my notes. My notes are down the bottom that I'm working from off of the confidence monitor that's in front of me. The next thing is encourage interaction. Ask reflective questions, particularly during transitions. For example, when we're doing the architecture of identity, we'll pause and we'll ask some reflective questions. Are we on the mark? Is this the direction you think we should be taking your story? Is there something we're missing? And then always conclude with a personal anecdote like I just did, or a testimony to leave the audience with an emotional takeaway. So with that, rather than keep going on this, I want to hit pause and ask you to raise your hand using the hand raise button if anybody has a question right now, because we're halfway through this and some of you might have questions, and there's a lot more we're going to go over in the second half of this, but you may have questions. So raise your hand and let's answer them. Oh, we're doing that good of a job?
Oh
No.
God, we're doing a great job, or people are really shy.
Or they're really bored to death and they've fallen
I have a
asleep.
question, Andy, since
Thank you,
no one
David.
else took the opportunity. Is so, and I know there's a structure, but I guess and there are many variables, but do you find that you have, and I guess it would relate to 10-minute speech, 20-minute speech, just as far as how deep we should go. And I've been thinking a lot about CES too. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks. And I don't know that I'll be speaking, although we may host, some smaller things. But just having that in your back pocket, if it's not like it gets an initial, like a well-planned talk, is there kind of a whole structure we should think about going
There
through?
is. There's a lot of different ways that you can have a speech structured. But what I found, and if you ever break down Steve Jobs, who was probably one of the best presenters of our era, when you think about it, Steve was a master at keeping you engaged the entire time he spoke. And if you break down his conversations, they weren't long, but they felt like they were. They felt like you walked away with so much information. People say, "Did you see what Steve said? Did you hear what Steve said?" And Bill worked with Steve for many years, half a dozen years probably, between the three companies Bill and Steve were able to work together on, Pixar, Next, and Apple. Steve used a very simple approach, and it's one, when I think back, that I learned in my very first public speaking. State a problem, give the background on the situation, and provide a solution. Every Steve Jobs product introduction speech, everyone followed that model, right down to, oh, and one more thing. And it became like you waited for the one more thing. Now, the one more thing, those of you who ever took the Xerox course in personal selling or ever had a sales course will be familiar with the phrase, and I'm dating myself because, like Bill and so many of us, we're vintage, not old, we're vintage. We've been around a little while. The Columbo close. One more thing is exactly like the Columbo close of what would I, what would it have taken to get you to say yes, just as you're walking out the door. But that one more thing was literally the hook that everybody remembered about that new product. One more thing about the iPod, one more thing about the iPhone, one more thing about the MacBook Air. So, one more thing. So, you start to develop a rhythm. So, whether your speech is 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. God, if you're talking more than 15 minutes, you better be setting the world on fire. You better be declaring peace on earth. You better be solving the humanitarian crisis in Darfur or somewhere like that. Because quite honestly, nobody has time to listen to anything more than 15 minutes. It's like videos today. If you're producing a video that's more than 3 minutes, I'm clicking off. It better
Yeah.
be engaging. That's why you need a 20-second video, a 30-second video, a 60-second video, a 2-minute version, and the 3-minute for people who really. And then if you really want to get into the long time explainer video, great. You can do the 30-minute explainer of how to use your product. But we're talking about how you deliver your story. And to your question, follow a basic format. And then once you get a format that works, John Chambers of Cisco, when he was running Cisco, was a master of having a format that works. He found an opening for that audience. He customized it for that particular audience. He had the same middle, and he came back to the audience and gave them an end. But people all walked away going, damn it, Chambers said the same thing he said at the other event. I didn't see anything new. He was on one talk track. He delivered one story for that quarter based on that was what the message was they were delivering. But he had a formula. It was talk to the audience, tell him what he needed to tell him, talk again to the audience, and then leave. Speakers like that, eventually, after you watch them once or twice, you don't watch them again until 6 months later. But have a formula and mix. And I always say mix it up. Make people go, every time I see David speak, tells me something new. Now, remember the golden rule. You should walk away from every speech you hear learning one new thing. If you
And
don't
that,
learn one new thing,
and that's one of the points. When you're preparing, ask yourself, what do you want people to remember? You got to start there. What do you want them to take it away from? Because they're only going to remember, you're lucky if they remember one thing. You're really lucky if they remember two things that you said. And it's off the charts if they remember the three things that you said, because people, it's not how people take away. So it's good for you when you're planning on what you're saying is what's the one thing that you want them to do? How does that resonate throughout your story? And where do you bring that in? And that's also what Andy was saying, it's the tell them, talk about it, and then to tell them what you told them, or formula. And so at the end, in the in what you want, in summing it up, and one more thing, it's always about keeping your attention and emphasis, but it's not. Now let me tell you what the one more thing. Now let me tell you what we did on our holiday in the Azores. Not that. Anything that one more thing is simply one more way to handle to come home at that core topic, and then afterwards ask yourselves, when you're talking to people at the end of the show and people are giving you their cards and all of that, ask people, well, what did you like most about what we had to say? Again, that is getting in, hearing the voice of your customer.
one of the things that's real important is to know what you're saying. And if you say it right, you're going to end up really accomplishing things that you want to accomplish. And part of that is knowing that you hit the money shot. We like to say the art of the quote, being quotable. When you say something that comment is going to resonate with your audience. And having given hundreds and hundreds of media interviews and talked to reporters since I'm 14, I always know when I'm about what I've just said is going to make the story. And I call that the money shot. You just know you hit it out of the park. And how do you know? You're the first line in the story or the last line of the story. You always want to be the first or the last quote. So it's good to be in the story, but that opening line, and then you really have hit the mark when the words of the story start off with the phrase, David Layton, blah, 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 or Martin Sarnas, blah, 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 at the very beginning of the story. You know that you made an impact with the reporter. If the analysts write a report that starts off with your company name first, you know you've made a significant impact. And if people walk away from an event saying, I saw so and so, and they said this, or we need to be working with this company, I just learned all about them at the XYZ event. You know you did your job effectively. So structuring that narrative as part of the what and delivering it to who, where you deliver it, how you deliver it, and most importantly, when. Don't try and
Timing
get
is everything.
timing is everything. Know how to pause. Learn the art of the pregnant pause. Now, I'm going to give you one other tip. And this is kind of one which works in dealing with customer service as much as it does talking to reporters. Cadence. Now, you're saying, what do you mean about cadence, Andy? Let somebody ask you a few questions along the way after you've paused, and then count to yourself 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Hear how long they've paused. Do that a few times. And now you know that they pause for a second, 2 seconds before they ask you a question. And once you know that, pause for just before, then keep going and keep making your point and why? Stay on track with what you have to say. Force them to hold their questions till the end, because chances are you will already have answered their question before they interrupt you and take you down the garden path that they want you to go. Now, what you have to learn how to do is if they do get a question in, is how to turn what we call turn the question to bring it back to what you want to say. When I was in the hockey world, Ted Sater was the assistant coach of the Flyers, later went on to become the head coach of the New York Rangers. Ted was brilliant, brilliant when it came to handling an interview. The first hockey coach I ever worked with who didn't need media training. You could ask Ted a question like, Ted could be talking about the weather, and you could ask him, why did so and so screw up? And he would say, well, it's a real good question you ask why so and so screwed up on that play. And I got to tell you, just like we were talking about the weather outside, on this kind of day, anything can happen. He never answered their question. He turned it in such a way as to get back on track and to continue down the line, which in turn forced a follow-up question from a different reporter. Well, was it due to snow or was it due to rain? Now they're back on track talking. Completely took it away from talking about why a defenseman screwed up on coverage in the offensive zone. What I'm saying is learn how to turn the question back to what you want to talk about. You control the narrative. You control the
yeah,
narrative.
and remember the meta idea, what you want people to remember. That's your anchor. And it's not just the public speaking. It can be being in an interview. It can be talking with a customer. What any kind of percentage. If you're very clear at what the core idea is, and at the foundation of your business, and it means if you've really understood how what your vision is, what you want to project people, what you think is important. If you're very clear in that, you will always have a safe place to come back to, if that makes sense. So someone may ask a question off of here, but you have at a gut level, what you need to come back to.
We were working with
to practice, a good practice of this, if you're going to be giving a talk, or you're even just practicing your pitch, your sales pitch, if you're in a sales situation, practice it with your wife or your girlfriend or another friend who will give you some good feedback, and ask them to play, bad audience, right? Take me off the track, and that'll give you it'll exercise your ability to come back to this core idea.
One of the things that we were working with a company in England, and they brought in a media trainer. And we've been doing media training before, but as Bill would say, we've never seen a good idea we wouldn't steal. The reality is that this trainer introduced a concept that I had never seen in some 30 years at that point of doing media training. He called it a message house. Very simple concept. Think of a house, put a room up top, put 2 rooms on the next floor down, put 3 rooms on the next floor down, but put your core idea at the very top. And the idea was to always be able to get back to your core idea, no matter what box somebody went to. And if they went to the box 1 level down, it was easy to go 1 floor up. But if they brought an idea from the basement, you had to explain the middle level before you got them back up. But you showed the storyline in a continuous way, and message continuity is important. But you had a route to get back to the top of the house. Now, you could have 6 floors. You have a route to go back, and always base your story in fact. One of the great things here about telling a good story, whether you're delivering a speech, you're making a sales presentation, you're in a board presentation, you're in a funding pitch, is know your story inside and out, backwards and forwards, that you could start in the middle to get to the beginning and the end, or you could start at the end and go back to the beginning, depending who your audience is. And the other thing, never resist apologizing to the people in the room. Oh, I know some of you already heard this, so I'm sorry. I'll try and vary it for you a little bit, because I know there's some other people in the room. Translation, I might be dumbing it down because these people are really not an audience who we're used to talking to. A great trick if you're using ChatGPT or Claude is write this story for a 5-year-old. Write this story for a 12-year-old. Write the story for for a college graduate, write the story for a bunch of PhDs. By the way, it's easier to write for a 5-year-old than it is for a PhD. We all know that. But believe it or not, they're both the same story. It's just how much more you've fluffed it up. So never use our tools to think about audience appropriateness or say, I usually deliver this story to a bunch of real estate agents. I need to deliver this story to doctors who invest in real estate. Make it relevant to the physicians. Well, ChatGPT is great for that. You can come up with multiple variations of a story for different audiences, but it's the same story. So one of the great things about, we were talking earlier on before we got started, was the ability to use the tools, whether it's Claude, Grok, ChatGPT, Gemini. By the way, if you're not talking to Gemini on your iPhone now, using your regular Gmail account versus a paid workspace account, because Gemini for free is right now better than Gemini for paid, you're missing out. If you're not using Notebook LLM or Notebook LM with Google to hear how people would tell your story about you, big mistake. And if you're not playing with the new tools from 11 Labs that lets you do the same thing, shame on you. These tools are all out there. And basically, you can use them for a good while they're free. And as Ken Rakowski and I used to say on the World Tech Roundup years ago, if it's free, it's me. If I've got to pay, it's no way. Make a play on the free product first. Try it out. And then decide whether it's right for you. But I will tell you, having played with Gemini and obviously Apple Intelligence since I've been in the Apple beta since I don't know how long, I've been using Apple Intelligence AI. These things are really game changing. They are making my life easier. I don't feel stressed. I have time left at the end of the day. And as Bill will know, like, we'll talk in the morning, we'll get stuff done. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, done. If I want to,
or differently, because of these new tools, we used to have that conversation in the morning, and it would take us all day to start processing through it, and then we'd regroup, and then in the afternoon, and kind of where are we in our process now, because Andy loves doing all of these tools, and Andy loves being the early adopter, and he's brilliant at it. He's uses these tools more than I do. Now, every 25 minutes, I'm getting a call, I'm getting a new email going, oh, Bill, check this out. Check this out. We just processed the whole thing through this new way of looking at it. And so I think you're going to find that you figure out how you can use these tools to accelerate what you already need to do, what you're already doing, and how to take the wasted time out of the process. And I don't know, and another thing where I think this is all going is, it kind of started, well, for me, it started with ChatGPT just in the conversational mode. I keep this thing on my, near my computer when I'm writing all the time, and I'll just say, because I've named ChatGPT Rex, and I'll say, hey Rex, what's it like during the 60s in Oxford? What were people wearing? Because I needed to put that into a story. Boom, right there. Now, I could have Googled that, and I could have gone back to old pictures, and I could have done a lot of stuff, and it would have taken me, an hour using the old way. And now, in a second, boom, there it is. And
wait
so,
Bill, wait until you learn
takes
how to replace Siri with Rex. I have to show you how to replace Siri with Rex, and you'll be even.
I'm trying to get them together. I'm trying to.
They won't hook up.
They have something.
There is a way to do that, but anyway, if you're not using tools like Gamma to put a presentation together. Oh, by the way, early adopter alert, the new Google Vids turns a static presentation in slides or a Google Doc into something great. So if you're on a paid workspace account, check out Vids. It's part of your package. You're paying for it already. If you're on the base, I think it's on the basic level of workplace, whatever they call it.
Workplace is $23 or something.
Whatever that plan is, check out Vids. Also, Gamma is a wonderful tool. David's on the advisory committee for Gamma. Anytime I have complaints about Gamma, I tell David and David tells them. And then the next day, David says, here's what they're working on. They appreciate that. You should also be playing with Napkin. Now, one of the things that Bill 20 years ago started working on was his book, Marketecture. And I'm waiting for my signed autograph copy, Bill, of Marketecture, because I've been waiting for it since 2003. But Marketecture is there's a story of words through pictures or something like that you originally came up with. Well, Napkin makes everybody Bill Ryan's Marketecture, and it gives you visualizations of the words, and not just a single visual, gives you like dozens upon
Six
dozens.
different ways of looking at
Oh, no,
this.
that's six until you get down to the bottom, and then you cross the button and it gives you six more. But then when you click the design you like, it'll give you 5 or 6 concepts of that design. So if you're not using tools like Napkin, Gamma, Vids, Notebook LM, these are all out there for you to use beyond ChatGPT. And then the other thing that I'm going to suggest that everyone learn how to do in a couple of minutes is build a framework that works for you. We have a framework that works for us that allows us to extrapolate everything from value propositions to why matrices to analyst presentation decks, because we've learned, and this is like taking this stuff out of my brain, out of Bill's brain, out of 20 some years of an agency's brain, how to take the best of what we've learned and distill it down. And then we get the raw output that we can massage and customize and improve upon. So learn how to do things. And by the way, if you're just relying on the basic ChatGPT response, you're not really using the tool to its capabilities. So learn how these tools work, learn how they surf the web. Understand that Claude doesn't surf the web, but OpenAI does, sort of. But you got to know what you're doing to get that to happen. Understand when it's synthesizing, and most importantly, understand when it's taking an acid trip and it's hallucinating. Because while that acid trip might be good, if you're listening to the Grateful Dead or Jefferson Airplane or Quicksilver Messenger Service or Jimi Hendrix, it's not good when you're selling a product and the other person hasn't smoked crack in years.
Sure, but I will say too, Andy, and I love all of that. For those that may just be starting to get on AI and use some of these tools, don't think you have to know all of it, right? Start using ChatGPT, start solving problems. I mean, one of the biggest problems I have is just keeping to remember, oh, I should just use ChatGPT or Claude for that. Because I mean, and I have all these ideas going through my head as I'm preparing for CES and just coming up with my structure of the conversation as we move into the next set part of the talk. But or maybe we already had it, but right, and now I can relate it. I'm going to speak to Samsung, I'm going to speak to this company, I'm going to digital health section, and then how does it translate to those verticals, right? Thank you, that's great.
And also, I would remind people that WITI has AI sessions that are really good, where people are talking about the tools that they're using and that. And and that Metal does one of these too. I participate, and when people bring up a new tool or something that they're doing, they put it in the chat. I click on that, I put it in a folder, and then sometime during the day or the next few days, I go through that folder and I go, oh, let me just try that, because it's all free to try, and then because a little bit, just take a half an hour every day and you'll like be a master in all of this in a short period of time. So anyways, thank you for listening. I think we're kind of winding up. David, you want to talk about what else is coming up?
No, that's it. Thank you both. We do have the Odyssey men's group starting right after this. We have a lot of great content as we go into the holidays. We'll be doing a CES preview. We'll be at CES. We do have some tickets for some of our members. DM me if you're interested. I've got one on reserve for you, Andy, if you tell me you need one.
I already have my media.
Good. Okay, I figured. Okay, anyway, thanks everybody for being here. And have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Amazing. Bye, everybody.